County 911. What's the address of the emergency?
This is Don Sipple calling, and I have a lady that just came to my house, and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn, and...
Okay. And is she injured?
Yeah, she's injured. Her mouth is kind of got some blood around it, and her clothes are all torn.
Okay. And she's by herself?
She's by herself. She walked to my house here just recently.
Okay. And can you ask her what her name is?
Just hold on a second.
Okay.
What's your name, ma'am? What? You don't know? She's in kind of bad shape. She just says she don't know.
Okay. Let me put you on hold. Do not hang up. I'm going to start some help, okay?
Sure.
On March 22nd, 2018, Don Sipple was at home on his dairy farm in Springbrook near Eau Claire, Wisconsin. His day was just like any other. That was until 4:15 p.m. when he was alerted by a banging at his door. He opened the door to find a young woman covered in blood and bruises, barefoot and mud up to her knees, with the word boy carved into her arm. She told the man that she was the victim of an assault, and he called 911 on her behalf. What this innocent dairy farmer was not aware of is that the woman he was assisting had just committed the brutal murder of her ex-lover. Welcome and thank you for joining me. The story I have for you today is one of murder. We'll be taking a look at a complicated love story and how a young man's life was cut short by his ex-lover. When police arrived at Don Sipple's dairy farm to speak with the young woman, she seemed inconsolable. She was crying and repeatedly saying, "I don't know." When asked for her name, she stated she could not remember, but was able to give her age as 19 and that she was from the city of Eau Claire. The hazy details provided became clearer with each statement she provided, and over time some details would change. There was something she was not telling the police, but first we need to step back and ask, just who is Ezra McCandless? Ezra McCandless was born on October 6, 1998, to a 14-year-old mother. She never knew her biological father. Her birth name was Monica Kay, which was later changed to Monica Carlin, the surname of her mother's partner and adoptive father. Her parents divorced when she was 12 years old. However, it's said that she continued to have a close relationship with her adopted father. It was during her years in high school that she began to struggle with her identity. She experimented with different names and pronouns, and has openly stated that she is gender fluid. She would go on to legally change her name to Ezra McCandless before dropping out of college and moving from her hometown of Stanley, Wisconsin, to the city of Eau Claire, around 30 miles west. The surname McCandless came from American adventurer Chris McCandless, known also as Alexander Supertramp. He lived a nomadic lifestyle and was the subject of the book Into the Wild, which was later adapted into a feature film. Ezra's knowledge of Chris McCandless is questionable, as she seemed to believe the book had been written by McCandless himself, when in fact it was written after his death. Ezra McCandless was an amateur artist and described as someone who enjoyed drawing attention to herself. She would even drive around in town in a car covered in her own illustrations. Could her name change also have been an attempt to gain attention? Ezra McCandless is certainly a more unusual name than Monica Carlin, with Ezra having biblical associations and McCandless coming from the famed American adventurer. Was this just a way for her to stand out? Towards the end of summer 2017, 19-year-old Ezra met 33-year-old Jason Mengel, a National Guard medic in the Army Reserve. Jason says he was in love with Ezra from the moment they met, despite the age gap. He said that she kept him energized and kept him doing things and living spur of the moment. Jason stated that Ezra was wild, constantly doing things like breaking into abandoned buildings to take photos. After just a couple of months, the pair moved in together, sharing a home from August 2017. They contemplated marriage and would even play around with calling each other husband and wife. It seems their relationship was burning intensely, moving very quickly and getting serious without hesitation. It might be worth noting at this point that accelerating intimacy in a relationship is something that is often seen with narcissists. Regardless, the relationship of Ezra and Jason seemed like a great match, and the two were often seen together at Racy's coffee shop, a popular hangout downtown. It was there that the couple befriended one of the barristers, Alex Woodworth. Alex Woodworth was working as a barrister at Racy's coffee shop while working as a substitute teacher. He also had aspirations of becoming a philosophy professor. Alex was the eldest of 4 children who loved playing the role of big brother and was active in church with his family. His father described him as someone who was deeply committed to helping others and caring for them. Alex was a bright young man with a bachelor's degree majoring in philosophy and had been applying to graduate schools to begin his PhD studies. Ezra, Jason and Alex quickly became very close friends. In October 2017, Ezra McCandless found that she was pregnant with Jason Mengel's baby. She chose to abort the pregnancy and as a result experienced guilt and trauma. It was from this difficulty that Jason Mengel pushed Alex and Ezra to spend more time together. Jason believed that the two shared similar viewpoints and could help each other with emotional issues that they were each dealing with. This, however, would be the start of a complicated set of relationships. Ezra and Alex did confide in each other. They found comfort in each other just as Jason had believed they would, but this comfort led to intimacy and the start of a secret romantic relationship between Ezra and Alex. However, this affair was not enough for Ezra. Jason went away for 2 weeks for work, and while he was gone, Ezra slept with his friend John Hansen. It wouldn't take long before Ezra's disloyalty would come to light, as Jason would come to find messages on Ezra's phone, messages to both Alex Woodworth and John Hansen. Jason confronted Alex and Ezra about their relationship. Alex apologetically admitted the truth about his role with Ezra. However, Ezra claimed that her relationship with John Hansen was not consensual and that he had sexually assaulted her at a party. With this news, Jason immediately went to the police to file a report, telling Ezra's story of being drunk and passed out at the time of the assault. Ezra would tell the same story when questioned by the police. During her questioning, she adopted a very defensive pose, with her knees up against her chest. Detectives found her to be a very believable victim. However, they investigated this assault accusation, and as they did, the evidence against Ezra mounted. Firstly, they found the flirtatious messages sent between Ezra and John, and secondly, they interviewed Alex Woodworth. It was while questioning Alex that they learned that the sexual encounter between Ezra and John had been consensual. Ezra told Alex that it was consensual, but she had come to regret it after the fact. It's theorized that Ezra, being caught out in her affairs with 2 other men, jumped at the chance to gain some sympathy, or perhaps shift the blame from herself and attempted to throw an innocent man under the bus. With the evidence stacked against Ezra, the case was ultimately dropped with no charges brought against John Hansen. Her infidelity had been revealed and Jason Mengel ended the relationship then and there. In the days following, Ezra would text Alex, telling him to never talk to her again. It seemed that she felt Alex had caused the end of her relationship with Jason. After all, had he not vouched for the innocence of John Hansen, Ezra may have been able to use that sympathy to keep her relationship alive. Ezra's network of lies had fallen apart around her. She had gone from juggling 3 men to nothing, and moved back home with her family. Though this didn't stop her from trying to win Jason back. She told tales of manipulative, vindictive men who tried to take her away from him. She blamed these other men for what happened to their relationship, rather than admitting to her own faults. It didn't work though. After their 8-month relationship, Jason was through being messed around and lied to, and refused to take Ezra back. On March 22nd, 2018, Jason Mengel was at Racy's coffee shop where he was surprised by Ezra McCandless walking in the door. The two spoke and Ezra said that she was going to visit Alex to show him some journals she had written and that she was going to take back her life and become Ezra McCandless again. Ezra leaves the coffee shop and drives over to Alex's home, but something doesn't sit quite right with Jason. He described her as seeming agitated. Something feels wrong. He gets onto his bicycle, riding over to Alex's home and finding Ezra's car outside, easily identifiable by the illustrations adorning it. He paces around outside, waiting for them for about 45 minutes, before finally walking into the home unannounced. Jason enters to find Ezra and Alex talking, but something is off. He describes their faces as masks, as if something was happening, but they wanted everyone to believe everything was fine. You could taste the tension. Jason raises his concern that something isn't right, and suggests that the 3 of them should talk in a public place. As the 3 leave the house, 2 police cruisers approach. Jason's loitering and pacing outside the house has raised suspicions from passers-by who called the police. Alex can be seen speaking to a police officer with Jason off the screen, and Ezra seated in her car, not visible in the dash cam footage. Jason tells the officer that Ezra had given him a vibe and that something felt wrong. The officers, seeing nothing of concern, go about their business and leave the three alone. As the police leave the area, Jason can be seen approaching the vehicle to talk with Ezra and Alex for a few moments. Jason's intuition was right, something was wrong. What he was not aware of was that this would be the last time he would see Alex Woodworth alive. Just over 3 hours later, Ezra knocks on the door of Don Sipple's farmhouse. She is covered in blood, bruises, mud up to her knees, without shoes, and her clothes are torn all over. She's inconsolable and crying about an assault. Don Sipple speaks with a 911 operator but is unable to give them much information. When asked for her name, Ezra says she can't remember. She is, however, able to provide her age as 19 and state that she's from Eau Claire, though at this point she'd moved back to Stanley, around 30 miles away. Speaking to officers at the scene, Ezra is still unable to give much information, crying uncontrollably, hyperventilating, and repeating the phrase, "I don't know." What she can say though is that she walked about a mile or two. She would soon be taken to a local hospital where she was assessed and asked for Jason Mengel. If there was ever a time to gain sympathy and be the centre of attention for the man she had so desperately been trying to win back, it would be now. At this point, officers would assume she either escaped her attacker or he let her go somewhere within a mile or two of the farm. However, later that evening, while police were still searching for her assailant, she would tell them that the attack took place in Owen Park. The dairy farm is more than 12 miles away from Owen Park, well outside of town. If the assault had taken place in Owen Park, then Ezra McCandless must have walked through miles of suburban neighbourhoods, left town completely, and made her way down isolated country roads for another 10 miles or so before reaching Don Sipple's dairy farm. Her story was inconsistent right from the start. It suggested that she later claimed Owen Park to be the location of the assault to throw detectives off the trail, but of course it didn't work. The following day, on March 23, 2018, Wisconsin detectives discovered the true scene of the alleged assault. However, it painted a very different picture to the one presented by Ezra McCandless. Not too far from the dairy farm, they found Ezra's easily identifiable vehicle on a muddy road. It was stuck in the mud, explaining why Ezra would have abandoned it. But the car was not the only thing the investigators found. The body of Alex Woodworth was found hanging out the back seat with the door wide open. Alex was already dead. He was found with 16 stab wounds across his head, neck, groin and torso, with the knife used found along the muddy road near the car. At this point, investigators were no longer looking for an assailant on the run. They had a homicide on their hands. Detective Ryan Prock would return to the hospital, armed with specific details of the crime scene and what happened to Alex. Upon speaking to Ezra, her memory of the assault had returned. She says that Alex found a knife in her car and began carving something into her arm. She shows the detective the word boy, crudely carved into her forearm. She explained that she had questioned her gender in school, and Alex was aware of this, often calling her boy as if to bully her. However, the detective does not believe Ezra's account of this injury. Ezra states that Alex was in the driver's seat of the car. However, that does not quite make sense. See, the carving is on Ezra's left arm, and it's legible from her point of view. If Alex were in the driver's seat of the car, he would have had to carve the word boy backwards and upside down from his perspective. Detective Prock isn't buying it. He calls Ezra out and she immediately admits that she carved it into her own arm herself. Ezra continues her story, but at this point she's already established her reputation as a liar, giving false information to a detective. She says that she and Alex ended up in the back seat of the car where Alex began to attack her. She states that he started cutting her pants open and trying to attack her, saying that it was the scariest thing she's ever experienced in her life, and getting visibly emotional. According to Ezra's version of events, she then grabbed the knife by the jagged blade and wrenched it away from Alex before stabbing him anywhere and everywhere she could. However, as with everything she's said up until this point, there's inconsistencies with this statement. If you were to grab a knife by the blade and pull it out of another person's hands, your palms would be flayed open. Ezra's palms, however, had only superficial cuts, not at all consistent with her story. By this point it was all but confirmed that Ezra was lying. The crime scene would come to offer further rebuttals to Ezra's story, as virtually everything she said was disproven. She stated that she stabbed Alex in self-defense in the backseat of the car. However, most of the blood at the crime scene was outside of the car, suggesting that the pair were not in the vehicle when the assault began. There were also virtually no defensive wounds found on Alex, the kind that would be received had he put his hands up to shield himself. The theory of the detectives is that Ezra's car got stuck in the mud just like it was found, and they both got out to inspect the situation. It was at this point that Ezra began her attack, and Alex attempted to climb into the car to escape her, ultimately passing away in this position. The knife used in the attack was a tack force folding knife, which was later confirmed to be from her father's house. It's not clear what caused Ezra to snap like this and take the life of her friend and ex-lover, though the prevalent theory is that she was doing everything she could to try to win back Jason Mengel, which could even mean getting Alex Woodworth out of the picture. Further along the road where Ezra fled the vehicle, detectives found Alex's phone. It had been smashed beyond all use, presumably to prevent him from calling for help. It was later determined that Alex would have survived his wounds had he been able to get medical assistance. Ezra was arrested on April 6, 2018, and charged with the first-degree murder of Alex Woodworth. The trial of Ezra McCandless would not begin until October 2019, a year and a half after her arrest. The angle of the prosecution was clear. Ezra was mad at Alex for ending her relationship with Jason. She would do anything to get Jason back, and believed that with Alex fully out of the picture, she could rekindle that relationship. And so, she drove Alex to a remote location with the intention of murdering him. Ezra's trial has come to be particularly controversial, not for the verdict or the sentencing, but for the defendant herself, Ezra McCandless. While on the stand, Ezra comes across as very comfortable, confident, with the general consensus being that she is lavishing in the attention. During the trial, Jason Mengel testified as a witness. Jason and Ezra had not seen each other in a year and a half by this point, and it's noted that upon Jason entering the courtroom, Ezra's face lit up with excitement. Jason would later discuss this experience from his perspective. He described Ezra as being overly attuned to him and giving him these looks. At one point she removed her blazer to reveal a green sweater that Jason had bought for her. He was shocked. He didn't know what her tactic was, but he felt uneasy by her demeanour. During the defence attorney took the risky decision to call Ezra to the stand. It's here that we see her in her element, the centre of attention. Everybody is there because of her, and everybody has to listen when she speaks. She's comfortable, she's calm, and she makes jokes while on the stand. Julia Post, a childhood friend of Ezra's, talked about her after the trial. Julia noted how happy she seemed when asked to spell her name and talking about the story behind the name Ezra McCandless. Julia said she's seen this version of Ezra before, a young woman who craved attention. It was during the defence that Ezra's newest version of events was unveiled. They began by setting up the story of how the sex life between Ezra and Alex was vanilla before she began encouraging him to explore his desires. She alleged that their sex life evolved into BDSM, and at one point holding a knife against her during sex. This would be quite a significant change in behaviour given the short amount of time that they were together. Her story then moves on to the day of the attack. She begins by saying that her anxiety was heightened in the moment due to her car being stuck in the mud. She states that Alex had straddled her in the back seat with the knife cutting her skin. She then knees him in the groin and he drops the knife, at which point Ezra started stabbing him anywhere and everywhere she could. However, if you can remember back to Ezra's statement in the hospital, something doesn't add up here. She told Detective Ryan Prock that she grabbed the knife by the blade and wrenched it from Alex's hands. Her version of events in court is suddenly very different to the version she told in hospital. Continuing her story, she claimed that she did not want to kill Alex, but continued stabbing him as he would not let go of her, even after struggling and getting out of the car, even after suffering stab wounds to his head, neck and groin. Ezra claims that Alex grabbed her and pulled her tightly to his body. Conveniently, she can't remember what happened next. The prosecution, however, does have an answer for what happened next. After killing Alex, Ezra spent the next few hours rearranging the evidence at the scene in order to blame Alex for his own death. She began cutting her body, cutting her clothes, and generally staging the scene. It was more than 3 hours between Jason Mengel seeing them in Alex's house and Ezra knocking on the door of the farmhouse. With the drive out to Spring Brook being just 20 minutes, Ezra had plenty of time to dress the scene to her liking. Ezra's testimony in the face of the prosecution is a series of cries for sympathy. She says she can't remember, that she feels dizzy and faint, that she can't process this, but the prosecution doesn't let up. They believe that by taking Alex's phone, Ezra deliberately left him for dead, knowing full well that nobody would get to him in time if he could not call for help. Ezra's version of this is that she did not have a phone of her own and took Alex's so she could call for help, but then fell down and broke it accidentally. This might have been believable had the phone not been damaged so significantly with a hole clean through it. Throughout the trial, Ezra's attorneys claim that she acted in self-defense, despite the mounting evidence suggesting otherwise, and even Ezra's own story being full of holes. On November 1st, 2019, the jury went into deliberation, and only 3 hours later, a verdict was reached.
Mr. McCandless, please rise. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ezra J. McCandless, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the information. And the answer to the special verdict question is yes, use a dangerous weapon.
The jury found Ezra McCandless guilty of first-degree murder, intentional homicide. For the first time in the trial, Ezra displayed genuine concern. There was fear in her expression. Jason Mengel described her as looking shocked, as if nobody believed her anymore, and she'd been caught. A few months later, on February 7th, 2020, the day of Ezra's sentencing had arrived. Throughout the trial, she had come across as a confident young woman who seemed to enjoy the attention she was getting. She showed no remorse when recounting the murder of Alex Woodworth. She showed almost no emotion throughout the process. But today was different. She expressed remorse. She apologised to the family of Alex Woodworth, but not without stating that she had also felt a great loss. Judge James Peterson was quick to point out the insincerity of this apology before handing down a life sentence with a parole eligibility after 50 years. The story of Ezra McCandless is a complicated one. It begins with issues of identity and ends in the murder of an innocent young man. Ezra has proven herself to be manipulative and deceitful right to the end of her trial. It seems quite clear from her demeanour in the courtroom and her relationships that Ezra is most likely a narcissist. She loved being in the spotlight, a sentiment echoed by just about everyone who knew her. Her relationship with Jason moved extremely quickly, showering him with love and intensity, and when she was later caught out for being unfaithful, she blamed manipulative, vindictive men for trying to take her away from him. She never accepted fault for her own actions. She played the victim right to the end, still to this day campaigning as a freedom fighter seeking justice. Thank you for joining me for this story of murder. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. Until next time.